Lake Travis Public Safety Day with all the police officers, firefighters, EMS. And as I left, I got into a car accident. So I was coming up down Colmeyer, making a left-hand turn onto 620 when somebody ran the red light and T-boned me. Fortunately, just behind the driver, so I walked away without having broken anything, and I have to wear this for a week, but that's it, so I'm fine. I had a really great first session, and so I'm so excited to be running for re-election. We have some really important things coming up in the next session, particularly redistricting so that we can draw some fair congressional districts. And even though we're going to get Julie into office this time, we'll have better districts for the future. I was really happy with my accomplishments. Given that I was a freshman, I was a Democrat, minority party in the House, I felt like I got some things done. I had a lot of people in the campaign asking me, how are you going to be able to get things done in this House? And I was able to reach across the aisle. My first bill up actually was on financial literacy. I thought this is something that is not a party-related issue. We need to have our young folks understanding finances when they get out of high school. So my bill would have had them take one semester of financial literacy in high school. It passed unanimously out of the House. And then it got to the Senate. And the thing was, everybody was paying attention to school finance reform. That was the big issue this session. When it got to the Senate, word started getting out to the principals and superintendents and school administrators, and they were a little bit freaked out because they just weren't ready for it. And they didn't know if they would have the teachers to teach it, and they were concerned about students having the time in their schedules to take it. Maybe football plays a role in that, I don't know. So it didn't pass the Senate, but we're going to continue working on it because I've had so many parents, so many business leaders say this is such a great idea. So we're going to continue with that. Another thing that I'm going to continue with is safety on our highways. There's been a lot of debate about what will make our highways safer. And while there's good arguments on both sides of it, we just need to make them safer. So if we can use a tool such as safety corridors, then we need to give it a try. And that was a bill that I worked on this session. It was actually brought to me by Greg Short, who formed Safer 71 after the death of the doctor on Highway 71. He suggested that other states are doing this, where the tech stop would be able to determine a part of a highway that's had a lot of accidents and fatalities and put up signs on either end saying it's a safety corridor. If you speed in this area, fines are doubled. So I also have to give a shout out to Constable Seuss, Stacy Seuss in the back there. Along with Greg Short, he has worked very, very hard to get more constables and law enforcement on our highways in order to patrol better and to, again, try to make them safer. So I appreciate that. I was given the award for Best Communicator during session, and that was because I got out and went before my constituents more than anybody else among the freshmen. And I have worked very hard. In fact, I've had a number of people say to me they thought I lived in Lake Travis because I'm here so often. And I often say, well, I feel like Lake Travis has felt like the redheaded stepchild. Sorry, Cody. Because maybe you're ignored a little bit, and I don't want you to feel like you're ignored out here. You're just as important as any other part of Travis County. So I have made a big effort to come out and be here, to hear what your concerns are, to visit with the mayor, city council, and understand what's going on out here since it's a big part of the district. Healthcare. We addressed healthcare just a tiny bit in session. We passed a bill for no surprise billing, and I was so excited. The thing is, so many people have gone into the hospital and they've had a doctor see them who wasn't in their network, and then they get this bill that their insurance doesn't cover. And they're like, what? How could that have happened? So this law says that the doctor and the hospital have to work out that payment and not put it on the patient.
Nice.
So that's great. Is being the state of Texas, it only applies to those insurance policies that are regulated by the state, which is only 40% of the policies here. So another 60% of the people in Texas are covered by policies that are regulated by the federal government. So we need that to also pass at the federal level. And you may have seen some commercials. I don't know, the insurance industry is not for it. That's another thing. We really need to work on campaign finance reform and get money out of politics. We also need to work on the environment. We didn't get a whole lot passed this time, although I tried. I tried to add an amendment to the budget that would have allowed for some extra charging stations at the Capitol. I myself got an electric vehicle, which is now totaled. But I thought it would be great so that if people came to the Capitol, they could charge their car and just making it more accessible, making it easier for people to have those electric vehicles. It didn't pass, even though we have this big chunk of money sitting in our budget that doesn't get appropriated every year. It's for emissions reduction. It's called the Texas Emissions Reduction Program, TERP. And yet they weren't willing to use just a tiny little bit of it to help go towards emissions reduction. But we're going to keep trying. And, is that my time now? Along with the environment, there is something that you're going to be voting on in November with the constitutional amendments that will send part of the sporting goods sales tax to help our state parks and our Texas historical sites. 93% of it would go to the parks, 7% to our historical commission. They have about $800 million worth of deferred maintenance in our state parks and about $40 million of deferred maintenance on the historical sites. So this is very important. Vote for that. And as Carrie said earlier, Proposition 4, there's going to be a lot of incorrect information going out about that. That's the income tax one. And basically, right now, what the Constitution says is, if at some point in time, legislators were brave enough to put that up to a vote, and that's not what's happening now, because no legislators were brave enough to put it up to a vote, then, if we had an income tax, 2/3 of the revenue would go to offset property taxes. So if this proposition passes this time, that language gets stripped out of the Constitution, and it just says that we can't have an income tax. So we tie the hands of people in the future to have another revenue source. And also the wording makes it sound as though corporations might be natural persons, and so that would potentially lose revenue of the franchise tax. So vote no on Proposition 4. And I think that's my time, but I was told that a couple of questions were going to be asked.
We have 2 questions for you. The first one, you recently visited an immigrant detention camp. Can you please tell us about your visit and what you can do about immigration policy as a state representative?
Absolutely. So I was taking DPS, because I'm on Homeland Security and Public Safety, we oversee DPS. And they invited me to the border to see their equipment and what that $800 million goes towards. So I flew down in their special plane with all the technology, I rode in their special helicopter, rode on the boat, and then I said, you know, this is all very interesting, but I really want to see a detention facility. I want to see where the kids are being held, I want to ask questions about it. So several other representatives expressed the same interest, and they set up a viewing of a detention facility for July 12th. Well, little did I know that this detention facility in Carrizo Springs only opened July 1st. And then it ended up being shut down because it wasn't needed after our visit. It was basically a dog and pony show where they set this up for us to see. There were only less than 200 teenagers at the facility, and of course they were being taken care of. They made it look very nice. So my question when I was there was, how long on average are kids being held there, and what efforts are you taking to get them back into their homes or with their sponsors, which is what they call either family members or foster care or whoever they're going to live with. And they said, well, we can't answer that. That's a federal question. So it's this constant back and forth. You know, we can only see the state regulated sites, but there's still a lot of questions that we can't answer because those are federal questions. It's very frustrating. Right after the visit to Carrizo Springs, we had a joint hearing with Homeland Security and the Economic Development Committee, and we got a lot of great information. We basically don't have enough judges to process the cases, and that's one of the big issues. So we have that information. What are we doing with it? And I'm, again, doing what I can. We need to change the composition of the legislature, though.
This past session, the Texas legislation allocated extra dollars to fund the Texas public education. Do you think the funding is sufficient? Is there anything you would have changed about HB 30?
Sure. So, yeah, they increased the basic allotment by over $1,000 per student, which I think is great. We put $6.5 billion into public education above and beyond what we would have otherwise. So, yes, I think we could make a great step in the right direction. The only problem is we didn't provide any new revenue source, although the governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker did try to provide a new revenue source by trying to increase our sales tax by 1%. So anytime someone says Republicans don't want to increase taxes, just remind them, your governor, lieutenant governor, and speaker tried to raise your sales tax this last session. But they didn't really do anything meaningful to bring in new revenue. And so in the future, that will create problems. We've got a cap on how much property taxes can be collected. 2.5% increase per year. We can't go above that. And so at some point in time, that will become a problem, and very soon we'll have to address school finance again. So, thank you all so much. I appreciate all the support.